we're here on this night that we've come to study to show ourselves approved unto God, a workman who need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. To those who are on the internet, we're at J.T Kerr Memorial Baptist Church in Jacksonville, North Carolina. I know some people, not you because you're here, but those people, they were saying, Jacksonville where? Well, Jacksonville, North Carolina is where we are tonight. And we are continuing in our series, and where we are, for those who are here and abroad, we're doing a survey, pretty much a synopsis of the New Testament. We have gone through the Old Testament. We're now in the New Testament. The only thing you will need, primarily, those who have been with us, they get this book. This book is a survey of the Bible that covers the Bible in its entirety, a synopsis of it. So, if you don't have the book, all you need is a table of contents in your Bible, because we're going down every book, and so it's already in there. If other individuals who have been attending this class, you have a cheat sheet, and it has all the books of the Bible listed and the category in which we place them, and that is what we try to emphasize. Over time, you should be able to place these books of the Bible in the table of your contents. You should be able to place them in a category. And once you're able to do that, then, of course, you're becoming more knowledgeable of how to rightly divide the word of truth. If you do not have this sheet, of course, we'll give you one. Most people who have been here on a regular basis, I said drop some water on that, who have had this sheet, they already have that, but we want everybody to have it. If you have more than one, that's fine. Okay. So, in talking about the New Testament as we are in now, those people who have been with us, they know that we've gone through the Old Testament. And I said that you can actually put up the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they will overlap. Now, do you understand that concept? The Old Testament and the New Testament are divided up basically the same way. Both of them have how many sections? The Old Testament has how many sections? And the New Testament has how many sections? All right. And we know that in the Old Testament, we begin with the law, and following the law is history. If we look at the New Testament, we have the gospel. After that is history. So, in the Old Testament, the law is what is given by God. The history tells us what happened when people followed the law and what happened when they didn't follow the law. So the whole Old Testament is going to be about what people did following the law, the consequences, and the rewards of following the law. That's the whole Old Testament. All right? All right? Of course, we break that down, but that's a synopsis of the Old Testament. So, the New Testament does the same thing. The New Testament starts out with the gospel, and the history is what did people do once they've heard the gospel, what happens, what the consequences are when they follow the law, which is the gospel, and what happened when they don't follow the law. Fortunately for us, we are still living in the history of the New Testament. We're in the New Testament history. That's where we are now. So the New Testament history will not end until the trumpet sounds. The Old Testament history ended pretty much with Jesus coming on the scene. He kind of closed the book. He didn't say, I came to destroy the law. I came that the law might be fulfilled. So the Old Testament is done when Jesus came. And we now are under the gospel, and we are following the gospel. We are not following the law of the Old Testament. For us, The law is the gospel. All right, so I need for you to understand that concept. Questions, comments? Because a lot of folks don't understand that. They're still under the Ten Commandments. They're still, you didn't follow it. We don't even have it on the wall. Some people have it on the wall. You really, if you're in the New Testament church, you don't need the Old Testament on the wall. The New Testament is governed by the gospel, and it ought to be in your heart. You don't need the tablets of stone to tell you how to do God's will when God has come into your life and it's written in the tables of your heart, and now you love thy neighbor as thyself. You love the Lord with all your heart, your soul, your mind. Love thy neighbor as thyself. So nobody needs to tell you thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not kill. If you love your brother, you don't need that, do you? Well, some people do that, mean they don't have the Spirit of Christ. Okay. Questions, comments, because we're going to move forward. Yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm.
You know, it's amazing, but like you said, the New Testament started when Jesus come on the scene. Not after he was raised, but like you said, when he come on the scene, because again, if we're following the gospel, that's what he did. We want to make sure he preached the gospel. You know, but again, that was just me.
Okay, and we live, everybody who is under Christ, we live according to the gospel. And the gospel is one story. And it's all about who? It's all about Jesus in life, death, resurrection. The gospel, that's what it's about. Even though we have 4 books that represent the gospel, they all are the same story. They're the same story. It's ironic that in this modern day time that somebody, got caught up and said, we're going to start going to Bible study. So they start coming to Bible study. And I said, everybody needs to, read at least one version of the gospel, and I recommended reading John, and of course they said, well, I'm going to start at the beginning, I'm going to read Matthew. And then when they got through Matthew, they started reading Mark. And they said, I thought Jesus already been dead and crucified, here he is going through it again. I mean, they were legitimate in reading. They thought it would be a continuing story. It's not a continuing story. It's the same story told from a different viewpoint. So when you understand the gospel, it's one story. When you say the gospel of Jesus Christ, you don't have to name Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It's the gospel is about Jesus. It just so happened that Matthew wrote his recollection, his testimony. Mark wrote his testimony. Luke wrote his testimony. John wrote his testimony. It's all about Jesus. From beginning to end, it's about Jesus. That's all it's about. Then it's not, you can't read and say this is a continuing story. You're not reading history. You're reading a testimony of one of his followers. And that's what each gospel book is about, even though the gospel is one story. The reason why I keep saying this over and over, some it's monotonous. You keep hearing it all the time. But you need to be able to tell it. You need to be able to say it too. You need to be able to explain it the same way. Because some people don't really understand. Like this man, he read it. No, I'm reading the same thing again. No, it's it's the same story. The other thing is, we said that if there are four books in the gospel, all telling the same story, they didn't get together and say, I'm going to write this. John, I'm going to write this. And Paul didn't write one, but some people don't know that either. And Luke said, well, I'm not going to get with John to write this. This is what I know. This is what I have experienced. This is what I can tell you about this Jesus who came, and I'm going to tell you everything I know along with the testimony of other eyewitnesses. I'm going to put it in a written form because we've been talking about it, but now all of our disciples are being killed off, and so we need to make sure that it is in a written form because the gospel is still being preached while they're writing. Keep in mind that the gospel books themselves were all written after Jesus has been crucified and resurrected. I'm talking about 30 years after. 30, maybe even more than that, after his death, they're recollecting. Because if you would look at, and we, those of you who got the dates and all of that, of how we got days and months, it's important to know some of that too. If you never got that, I have those. I try to keep everything so that we can get it passed out to you because all of this is going to come together. Bible study is not going to be a one-time experience. This is supposed to be a lifelong experience. From the cradle to the grave, you're supposed to be learning about Jesus, and the more you learn about him, the better you get to know who he is. For those who did not get the origin of days and months, which is not biblical, it's historical. If you've been here, you got it, but I don't know who's got it and who don't. Okay, getting back to where I was. If we got 4 different gospel writers, do we know why we have 4 different gospel writers? All right. Deaconess Suggs? They tell their own point of view. Okay, that's one answer. Or anything else? Why do we have 4 different writers? Why? All right, that's another point. All right, you're about to make 100. Okay, anybody else who really understands why we have 4 different writers? And I'm going to tell you again why we have 4 different writers. Each was writing to a specific group. Each was writing to a specific group. Matthew, of course, you do know that all of them were Jews, right? Or all of them were Jews. But Matthew was writing specifically to Jews. His message was specifically, now we're looking at it in hindsight, and we just see it all coming to us. But when he was writing, he was only writing to Jews. He wasn't writing to any Gentiles. He wasn't writing to anybody outside of his religion, which was the Judaism, is what we call it now, because they never called it that. But he was writing to only Jews. And when we study it, it becomes evident that he's writing only to Jews because he's using terminology that only Jews would know. He's the only one that talks about a Messiah. All the rest of them don't know what. The average person who was not a Jew would not have known what a Messiah is. He is writing about a Messiah. He is writing about things that Jewish people knew about. And everything he wrote kind of pointed to some Jewish things that everybody else did not mention in their writing of the gospel, of the history of Jesus, or the life of Jesus. They did not incorporate. So Matthew, his focus was to the Jewish people. All right, keep that in mind because as you read it, we'll begin to see that. But I need for you to know up front why we got 4 different writers telling the same story. He was only interested in Jewish people. Even for a while, as you will learn, Jesus was only interested in Jewish people. Now that sounds very foreign, doesn't it? But yeah, he told a lady who came to the table, said she wanted to know something more about his kingdom and his message. And he said, it's not for you. It's not for people outside of the covenant of Abraham. It's for the children of Abraham. Really, that's who I'm delivering my message to. And she said, well, sometimes the dogs eat the crumbs from the table. Now, when you understand that point of view, then you understand that woman was not a Jew, and he did not shun her, but he said it's written. It was not written, and he was spoken to. He was only interested in the children of Israel under the covenant of Abraham, and that's who his message was for. And those individuals who was hearing it, some Gentiles heard it, and they said, well, even sometimes the dogs eat the crumbs from the table. And if you study the New Testament well, and even the gospel well, they referred to anybody who was not a Jew. They were a Gentile, but the more derogatory term was they were dogs. Okay. Now, once you know the truth will make you free now. Once you know that, then you won't be offended. But yes, everybody who is not a Jew to a Gentile, to a Jew, Gentiles were dogs. And they still are, from their point of view. That's why they won't let you in their house. And they won't come and eat with you. Okay. All right, now, I don't want to go very deep in, but that's Jews are still Jews, and they still have the same point of view unless they have been changed, unless they have been born again. Because Jews who have not been changed, even though they've been given a promise, even in the first book of the Bible, the children of Abraham were given a promise, and they're going to be blessed regardless of what you say about them and what you do to them. God going to bless them because he made them a promise. But that don't mean they're going to heaven. Just want you to know that. They ain't doing right. They're not doing right as a group. But God had a promise. He can't revoke his promise. So they're blessed until that trumpet sound. Now, when that trumpet sound, the promise is over. So if they haven't made up in their mind to turn to Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, they go to hell with the rest of them. Okay. Questions, comments, if I'm getting over your head. Go ahead. Yes, Sister Vanessa. Ma'am? Why Jews will not get into heaven? Because they have not acknowledged that Jesus Christ is Lord. Because they don't, in their law, you have to go back to their law. Because if you can recall, they wouldn't go into Pilate's house in the New Testament because they don't go into the house of a Gentile, because that's just like walking in sinful territory, and they don't want no sinful people to come into their house. Because if you're not born a Jew, then you sinful, you're a dog. That's really what it's about. But yes, of course, they have their own diet, they have their own dress, they have their own codes, and they segregate themselves from other people. They don't mind doing business with you, but they don't mind you doing business with them. They won't do business with you. I used to work for one. Now I know they didn't never bring that up, and I didn't know all this what I know now. But then it wouldn't make me no different because they paid good. They paid good. They took me out of a job that I thought was a good job, and they said, I'm going to pay you double. But see, they ain't never paid me no benefit. But as a young person, you don't care nothing about no benefit. I was working at the Riggs National Bank, 19 years old. Riggs National Bank. And Brother Nobles, he know about that, Riggs National Bank. But I thought it was a good job. I had to go through everything to do to get a government job. You had to go through and do with the Riggs National Bank. I was 19. Okay, I got the job, thought I was doing good, and I used to shop to a store that I bought my school clothes from when I would go up to D.C. every summer to keep from working in tobacco. And and so this man, I still was going there, and he said, man, he wanted me to work for him. He said, I know about how much you make, he kind of know what you kind of know what people make based on in general. If they work for the government and their first line government employee, you know how much they make. They work for the bank, you know how much they make. Well, anyway, Riggs National Bank had 19 branches in Washington, D.C. All right, so he said, I'll pay you, the amount he gave me was twice as much as I'm making at Riggs National Bank. But he said, and of course, I have benefits and retirement and all that tied in. I'm 19. What I care about some benefits, some retirement, and some medical. And he said, here's what he said about benefits. He said, if you get sick, anything happen to you, I'll take care of it. And that's fine with me. You're 19. You don't feel like you're ever going to get sick. You're going to get rid. All right. Anyway, the reason why I say all of that is that they don't mind dealing with you. If you know these stores that they have in every community, mostly it's going to be clothing, it's going to be jewelry, whatever they got. They want you to come do business with them. They're not going to do any business with you. All right. Keep that in mind. And it's because of their law. The law is, that's set. They already set. They don't have nothing to do with Jesus unless they have been born again. For the most part, they don't accept Christmas because Christmas is about Christ. Right. So, I mean, if you're a Jew, a Orthodox Jew, Christmas has no meaning to you. And Easter has no meaning to you. The resurrection has no meaning to you because it's all about Jesus. All right. I just need for you to know that. That is why it shouldn't be hard for you to understand why Jews are going to hell if they don't become born again just like we are. All right. They got a promise now. And that's why we bless them. That's why they're blessed. But also, you have to think about everything that I've taught. Jews were bound to the law. And if they're still bound to the law. They're still bound to the law. Even though we're in the New Testament era, they are bound to the law because they never accepted the New Testament, because the New Testament is about who? All right, so they're still in the Old Testament. All right, in what they believe, of course, is that they are stuck in the Old Testament. And I said the law, the Old Testament was about what happened to you if you followed the law, what happened to you when you didn't follow the law. Remember, we stuck with that. The reason why Jews have been up and down, they became a great nation under David and Solomon. After Solomon died, they became a nation that was in captivity. They lost their land, they lost their temple because they would not follow the law as a group. All right, they went on and on and on through the Old Testament history. They got into modern times. They went in all different countries of the world, and they took over the finances of every country. The money purses of every country in the known world. They had some Jews that were in charge of the diamonds, the gold, and the silver. Still are. They still are. God gave them that right. They know how to do diamonds and jewelry and all that, and they're still in it. And the thing is, according to their law, they're supposed to teach their son. They won't teach you how to do nothing. They won't teach you how to do nothing. I'm telling you the truth now. Y'all don't have to believe what I'm saying. But it's in their law that the son does what his daddy did. If Goldstein was a gold in charge of gold, then the son gonna be in charge of gold. Okay? Not only that, the reason why you really don't see no poor Jews, they're not charging their brother interest. If they do charge their brother interest, in 7 years, it's paid out. It's automatic. So they don't never stay in debt with another Jew. All right? They won't do it with you now. That ain't got nothing to do with you. I'm just talking about how they do each other. Every Jewish child, every Jewish male has an inheritance in Israel. Automatic. If they don't have nowhere else to go in America, they can go to Israel. Because there are more Jews in America than there are in Israel. All right, I'm getting off my subject. We'll get back. Let me get back to where I was, but I hope that y'all saw that as interesting, because we will go into that more. That's why you can't learn all this in one night. I don't care what you do. You can't learn it in 1 year. I'm just trying to impart as much knowledge as I have onto you. Getting back to the gospel. And I think we got off that because we were asked the question about why they won't let you in their house. And so that's all of that is the long story of it. That's the long story. So if we know that the book of Matthew was directed most to Jews, Mark has a different audience. And if you notice, there are 28 books in Matthew and 16 in Mark. Chapters. Yeah, let me get my terminology straight. 28 chapters, Matthew, 16 in Mark, and they're telling the same story. They're telling the same story. And they start basically with the same concepts, even though Matthew talks about the birth of Jesus. Mark doesn't do a whole lot about that. Matthew talks about the resurrection, the crucifixion, resurrection. Mark doesn't do a whole lot of talking about that. He doesn't elaborate, because he's talking to a whole nother group. He's talking to the Romans. The Romans are the people in charge at the time. The Roman Empire is ruling the world. And Mark God gave him the unction to go to the people running the world to make sure he directs the message of Christ to them. And he talks to the Romans who are quick, fast, in a hurry. They want to hear the rest of the story. You know, in other words, when you're talking with people and you say, I got a whole story, but I'm going to make a long story short. That's what Mark does. He's talking to people who don't have the time. I don't need to hear, make a long story short. Mark gives them an abbreviated version, but within that there's a lot of power, straightway, and he had much power, and a lot of the things about power are emphasized in the book of Mark because he's talking to a powerful group of people who have conquered the world. These people have conquered, over time, they conquered the greatest empire, which was the Greek Empire, who had already subdued the whole known world. The Romans come along a century later, and they take over not only the Greek Empire, but all the other empires that exist at the time. They had everything from the coast of Africa all the way through Asia, all the way to Europe. They pretty much, the Caesars thought that they owned the world. They say everywhere you go is a part of the Roman Empire. In fact, they said all roads lead to Rome. They started building roads, and they connected their kingdom with paved roads, and that made their empire greater. But they owned the world at one point in time. They got to the point where, of course, later in history, they kind of dissolved, but they transferred their power to the church, and the church became the Roman Empire. The last great Roman emperor, when we think of Constantine took over the church. This is 300 years after Jesus stuff. But we won't get into that until we start getting. But I just want you to know that there's some other stuff involved. But if you learn the basics, you can expand to learn more. So Mark is writing to the Romans specific, because quick, fast, in a hurry. They don't have time to listen to all of what Matthew is talking about. Mark tells them an abbreviated version, but with all of the miracles contained within it, and everything that happened in the life of Jesus contained in it, and the fact that you must be born again, all of that is contained in it. But his message is directed to the Roman Empire at the time. All right? Now, to keep going, you got Matthew, you got Mark, and then you got Luke. Let me tell you this from the outset. Because these books are in that order, it doesn't mean that's the order that they were written in. Just need to know that. Just because it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John don't mean that Matthew was first in writing. In actuality, Mark was first, but we'll go through that at another time. Mark was directed to the Roman Empire, and here we come with Luke. If we will note that of the individuals who are gospel writers, in fact, all of the original apostles of Jesus, and I'll add something to that later on, the most educated would have been Paul, who was not a gospel writer, but he was the most prolific writer of the Bible. He has more information than any of the gospel writers. And he was an educated person. The other educated person is Luke. And Luke was not one of the original apostles. Luke is sort of added to the group. He is a disciple of an apostle. But he had all of the information, and he had the knowledge that they had. And in his book, the first thing he says, I've gathered information from individuals who were with him all the time. And I've recorded that information in this book that I'm writing. In fact, it tells you that. And he is writing to a group of people who understand Socrates and Plato. He's writing to Greek people. The Greek people are the educated people who had been there. Even the Romans who conquered them are still following the Greek style and the Greek culture. Education was still the primary, I would say, all commerce and education was still Greek. Even though the Romans were in charge, they were kind of ignorant people. They were warlike people, ignorant. They just adopted the Greek culture. Even though they were in charge, they adopted the Greek culture. The Greek education system is what we use in America still, but they utilized a Greek form of education. They understood Plato, Socrates, and if you ever heard of them people. But if you understand Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, their way of thinking is that you got to know what you're talking about and be able to explain what you're talking about if you're going to tell me, because I'm going to ask you if I'm a Greek. And so you'll note that everything that Luke talks about can be verified through another source. None of the other gospel writers, you can't put a timeline on anything they said, or you can, they'll talk about they might have been at a certain place and did this and Jesus said this. But Luke comes along and says in the year that Cyrenius was governor and Caesar Augustus sent out a decree, you can verify that in the history books of the Greek people. That is how we have the time and the dates or the years that we use is based on what Luke said in the gospel according to Luke. That's how we determine AD and BC when we're talking about years, is because of Luke's gospel, even though they got it wrong. 325 years after Luke wrote it, they changed the Roman calendar, which was probably sort of like 725 in the year of the Roman Empire. They said, what we're going to do, we're going to use Luke, the time that he set, because we could look in our history and we see that Cyrenius was governor over Syria, and we see that Caesar Augustus sent out this decree. That's when Jesus was born. Remember that, right? That's what that's about. that gives us a date and time that can be verified. So Luke is pretty much almost a perfect historian. When we look at the Bible, his gospel is primarily a historical document. And they take that 325 years later and said, what we're going to do, this is the Roman Empire now, in 325 AD. They said, we're going to adopt Jesus Christ as the center of our whole religious system. And we're going to make this Christian religion preeminent over all other religions. They did not abolish all the rest of the religions, but they made Christianity preeminent. And what they said, we're going to make our time based on when Christ was born, based on what Luke said. And so when he was born, we're going to put that down. And anything that happened before that, we're going to say before Christ, BC. And anything after that is Annos Dominos, which is Latin, because who's in charge? The Romans, and their language is what? Latin. And so Annos Domini is going to be in the year of our Lord. So we still have that time today. But if you look up when Jesus was born in your Google, I'm sure some of y'all did it because we talked about Jesus and his birth before Christmas came. We kind of studied that. And you find out that all of the Google stuff say 3 to 5 BC. Am I saying something wrong? That means they got it wrong to start with, but we can't go back and change it now. They found out that, yes, they did go by what Luke said, but they had to go back and check again. Some historians went back 300 or 400 years earlier and said, okay, he didn't say that Cyrenius was governor more than one term and that Caesar Augustus overlapped that. So we don't know if he meant the first reign of Cyrenius or the second term of. Y'all understand what I'm saying? I don't want to go. I know sometimes it might sound like I'm babbling, but I do know what I'm talking about, even though I forgot half the stuff I know. Okay. Questions, comments? That is why Luke's gospel was directed to the educated Greek people. All right? Now, we still have another gospel writer. And the main three cultures of people that were present in the area of Palestine where the life of Jesus all occurs. Jesus never went more than 50 miles in any direction from a place he was born. Except, of course, when he was a baby, he did. He had to go to Egypt. Y'all knew that, right? But other than that, he never went outside 50 miles of where he was born as an adult. And one man asked, somebody, just wanted to be trivial, why he always walked everywhere he go. And there was one simple answer. And I'm going to have to reference a joke because a young boy used that same reference point on his dad when his hair was growing very extra long. And his daddy said, you need to go get a haircut. And he said, Jesus didn't never get no haircut, and Moses didn't never get no haircut. And he said, well, that's why they walked everywhere they went. Because he wanted, and that's the answer to why Jesus why did Jesus walk everywhere he go? He didn't have no car. Okay, so, and this boy tried to make it, said, well, I need to drive the car. I need to use a car, Dad. And Dad said, you need to get a haircut. And he said, Jesus and Moses and all them, Samson didn't get no haircut until Delilah cut. But that slipped by, y'all. But anyway, he said, well, if you want to be like Jesus and Moses, you got to do like Jesus and Moses. You walk everywhere you go there. Okay, let me get back on the subject. Now, there's only one gospel writer left, and that is John. John Yeah, I was trying to make the point that there were only three ethnic cultures in the Palestinian area during the time of Jesus and this story, the gospel. You got the Jews who live in Palestine. You've got the Greek people who had conquered Palestine, and then the Roman people who came and conquered Palestine. All of them are living there. So you got Jews speaking Hebrew, you've got the Greeks speaking Greek, and the Romans speaking Latin. That's emphasized specifically when Jesus was crucified. Do y'all realize that? That they told you what the three ethnic groups were and what the languages were when Jesus was crucified. Because they put a sign over his head on the cross that told you the three ethnic groups that were there. Y'all remember that? Because it says above him, it said Jesus, King of the Jews, and it was written in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Y'all realize that, right? All right, you can go back and you'll read it when you look about, because somebody, they were mad with that, say, no, we didn't say he was the King of the Jews. It had it in three different languages. It had it, Jesus, King of the Jews. It was in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Okay. Now, getting to John. John is a gospel that is universal. And that's why, I started out saying, I told people if they want to read the gospel, to read John. John's gospel is universal. He's the only one that talks about Jesus is love. You don't even hear nobody else talk about Jesus is love until John comes along and says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Then he goes on to say, by this shall all men know you are my disciples when you love one another. He goes on to say, love thy neighbor as thyself. He uses all the love terminology. And not only that, but he doesn't start the gospel with Mary giving birth to Jesus. He starts with Jesus in Genesis. It says, in the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among men. That's the first chapter of John. So he's talking Genesis stuff. He goes back and put Jesus in Genesis at the creation. He said, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among men. He came to his own, and his own received him not. Those are the Jews. They received him not. But to them, he gave the power to have salvation. All right, read the first chapter of John, and you'll see that he goes way back. In fact, it's a reflection of Genesis in the book of John. It's a universal gospel. So it's for everybody. It wasn't written for a specific group of people. Now, of course, we have it all. So all of it, all the gospel is for us. In fact, you can't get a full story about Jesus unless you read them all. Because everybody doesn't, if all of us, I use this example all the time, if all of us were called into court tomorrow morning to give a deposition about what happened here tonight, everybody is not going to say the same thing. You at the same place, you saw the same thing, you heard the same thing, but some things are more important to you than others. You may have the exact number of people who were present. Some people may not have all that. They say it was a man sitting up front, sitting at the desk. All people might say that, but some might emphasize, yeah, he had on a red shirt or what kind of shirt it is. But anyway, everybody's not going to say the same thing, but all y'all telling the same truth. So if you put all the truth together, you get the whole story. That's what we had to do to find about the birth of Jesus, because there's no one book that tells you the birth of Jesus. Is it? No, we had to put them together. And once we read the whole story, we get the whole story about Jesus. Because everybody don't remember everything. And everybody doesn't emphasize the same thing. And everybody don't want to tell the whole story. You might want to be like Mark and say, I'm going to make a long story short. Yeah, he was up there and he talked too long. But, but everybody's going to give their own viewpoint of what they saw. That's what the gospel is. But when you put it all together, you have a complete story. Now, I'm going to take a breath and allow you to ask me questions and to make sure that you are up to date with some of the things that I said, because I said a lot. And you won't find that in the 2 pages that's in this. This lesson has 1, 2, 3 pages. And I didn't even say anything about what's in the book. I gave you in addition to the book. So questions, comments. I need to have some feedback so I know that somebody was listening and somebody heard something I said, or you said I heard something I ain't never heard before. All of that can be done. Okay, don't be afraid to raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. Four different writers, 4 different perspectives. That is correct. That is correct. And we've always known that. We always say the gospel of Jesus Christ. But we didn't realize that we could break it down that way and see that all of it is for us now. But everybody didn't have the four books of the gospel like we have. The people that had Matthew's gospel, that's all they had. Keep in mind, that's all they had. And then they might have been getting a letter sent by Paul. So they had a gospel and they had a letter sent by Paul, depending on what church they were, as we will go into the letters and see which church specific got those letters, because everybody didn't have the letters. Only the church that had it directed to them had the letter. And it was because that particular church had a particular problem and the letter addressed the problem. Now, we have all the letters, because in every church, the problems that were addressed in the first century are still prevalent in the church today, and the answer is still the same. God has the same solution that he had in the first century, he has in the 21st century. The Bible still has the same answers, because the churches and the people have the same problems. But all of them are addressed in the Word of God, because they ask, and God sent through the Holy Spirit, the writer, to address the questions that were specific to them. Now, he addressed Timothy. Timothy had some situations. Thessalonica had their own situations. Church of Philippi, Corinth had a whole lot of problems. They were a problem church. That's right, had to give them 2 letters. So that tells you something about their situation. But the only people who had that was Corinth. They didn't have the letter that went to Timothy and the letters that went to Titus. They didn't have Philippi's letters. But over time, we got them all. So we have an advantage over everybody who lived in the Old Testament and everybody who have in the New Testament, because we're living in the sunlight dispensation where we can see everything clearly. All right, questions, comments? Matthew. Matthew addressed specifically the Jews, yes. Well, when you say Gentiles, they were Gentile, but also the Greeks. So I would kind of differentiate and make sure we're saying specifically to the Romans, because the Greeks are Gentiles too. So. Now you just got them mixed up. You just juxtaposed. Mark is writing to quick, fast, and hurry. He's the one making a long story short. That's why his book's so short. Okay, and then when you get to Luke, he's writing to the intellectual who were Greek. And they are based on the philosophy that is carried on by Socrates, Plato, and all of them kind of people. Philosophy, that's what, and if you note that if people who go to college, they have to take a religion or philosophy, because they make them equal. They make philosophy and religion equal. And that's what the Greek people did. They when they had Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, I don't know which, I have to think back who was first, Plato, Aristotle. Each one of them actually was a teacher of the other one, and they carried it forth for everybody. But when we consider that and even in the college situation, they treat them equal. Philosophy and religion is equal. And I tell people who go to seminary, make sure you're saved and sanctified before you go. Because they will mess you up. They will mess you up if you don't know anything. They will mess you up. Okay, I'll say that, because I know how they do. And I know how, and some people don't go to seminary because they're saved, sanctified. That's a whole nother story. Okay, now, any other questions, comments? Because I'm going to give you some things that are trivial, that don't have any specific place, but they are things that you need to have in your understanding. And one thing is, I try to tell people at some point in time, how do we get the terminology Jews, Hebrews, what else do they call? I'm going to get to it in a minute. The children of Israel are called Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews. And sometimes we don't know how to differentiate between that. I wrote something down to kind of help people out to try to explain it, because we kind of are in that same category as black folk. Black folk, we're in that same category because it all depends on what era, what time we live in, whether we're going to be called colored, black, or Negro. Is that right? And so the children of Israel, they were called Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews. And all of them, you can't say, okay, Moses. Now, what would you classify Moses as? All right, would he be classified as a Jew? In retrospect, we make them all Jews, right? We make all of them Jews, but Moses would not have been a Jew because they didn't have Jews. They didn't become Jews until after they went into captivity and came out of captivity. That's when they started calling them Jews. But let me go through it, and this is short. This is something that you will learn if you go through the Bible long enough, but there's no one place they're going to tell you what I'm telling you. Hebrews are the first name that they were called, and the first one who would call a Hebrew was Abraham. Abraham is pretty much the beginning of the Hebrews. Hebrews really meant, it was a terminology that meant he crossed over the river. Why is that important? Because when God created humanity, and he told them to go and populate the earth, and of course they did. They didn't do it on their own. They had to be forced into it. We get to Noah and the ark, and everybody is scattered abroad and went to every different place because he made them. He changed their speech so that nobody couldn't stay together. Most of the time now, you see that if people start talking something different than what you're talking, you move away from them. So that's what happened. That's what happened at Nimrod, the Tower of Babel, and Nimrod was in charge. Nimrod had everybody in the same place, working together, opposite of what God said do. All right? Is that right? Nimrod became the king of the world. Of course, we can travel back and find out that his descent was through the Hamites. He was part of Ham's tribe, which tells you something if you think Ham was going to be a servant all his life. He was the king of the world. Okay. In fact, it's out there on the wall if y'all want to see the Hamite. But anyway, what I'm saying is they had to be confounded in their language to go and spread about. When they did that, people tended to stay wherever they were. People, if you landed in a place, that became your heritage. You stayed there. And like I said, the Jews do, whatever your daddy did, that's what you did, and it goes on, you stay in the same place. People did not migrate. So when Abraham was called by God and told to leave this country where you at and go to a place where I tell you, he had to cross over many rivers, cross over many different groups of people, and they thought that was unusual. It was unusual for a man to leave his country, leave his kindred, and go somewhere else. So he was called a Hebrew by everybody who saw him, because he was going somewhere that nobody ever did that before. He crossing lands and he crosses over. All right. When he got there and established it, he stayed there for a while. And of course, he had, we understand Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are his lineage. Jacob, his name is changed to Israel. And Israel ended up with 12 sons over time. And so the nation became the nation of Israel. And so now these people are called Israelites. Even though they call themselves Hebrews and they have the Hebrew language, they're called Israelites. Same people. But they're known now as Israelites. All right, once they're Israelites, they end up, with Moses. Moses leads the children of Israel out of captivity, and they go back to the promised land. They try to go back to where God gave the land to Abraham. That's why I say it's important you got to know who came first. So Moses comes after Abraham, and Moses ends up going back, or he leads them back to where Abraham first received the land from God. He doesn't get there, but his people go there, and they go and establish this land that was given to Abraham. They call it the land of Israel. And they're still fighting over it today, because just like there were people in it then, there are people there now who are not of the children of Israel. They were told when they got there they were supposed to kill everybody there. Y'all do know that's what God told them. If they had done that, they wouldn't be fighting now. All right, and I told you, if you follow the law, follow what God said, you'll be blessed. If you don't, there'll be consequences. That's why they're fighting every day, somebody, over in a land. But anyway, going on from there, the children of Israel, they ended up building up that land, built a great kingdom under David, built a temple under Solomon, and they had a great city, Jerusalem, and they stopped following God, and God allowed the enemy to come in and destroy them, put them in chains, and put them in captivity. And they stay in captivity under Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. 70 years after that captivity, the Persians came and defeated Babylon, and the king of Persia allowed the children of Israel to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild it. And they go back, and because there are people living there, after 70 years y'all been gone, ain't none of y'all ain't never been here. Y'all going to a place y'all ain't never been, the same way that Moses and his people were being led to a place they'd never been, but it was theirs. I'm telling you a whole lot of stuff that's already in the Bible you're going to have to read. And so, because they were going to reestablish the city of Jerusalem, which was in the province of Judea, everybody started calling them Jews. And that name Jews stuck with them in the closing of the Old Testament. When you open up the New Testament, that's all you hear, Jews. The Jews, and Jesus was a Jew. And all of his disciples, all of them were Jews, and it was the Jews who crucified him. That's why in some modern circles, they don't like Jews because they killed Jesus. But the Jews didn't kill him, the Romans killed him. Okay. So you need to know there are Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews, and even though you could basically classify all of them as Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews, there were different eras of time where they were actually given that in the Bible. You don't hear anybody in Moses' time being called a Jew. But now, if we're talking about them, we talk about anybody who was in the Bible who was under the heritage of Abraham. We call them all Jews, don't we? The same way some people call y'all Negroes, colored, and black. In African American. We done had all them different kind of names. On my birth certificate, I think it still say color. I can't change it. It's color. Y'all, if you're old as me, you're colored. and yeah, I'm colored. They never did say what color it was, but they said I'm colored. So, questions, comments, because I'm gonna leave it there. That was just a tidbit to add on because there's no lesson for that. You have to read through the Bible 2 or 3 times to get what I just told you. Because you hear trivia now. They say Abraham was a Jew. Abraham was not technically a Jew. Abraham was a Hebrew. He's the first one. All right, and then you say David is a Jew. No, David wasn't a Jew. He was Israelite and a part of his Hebrew heritage, but he was not a Jew because Jews are after the time they were in captivity. They were set free and allowed to go back into the promised land and rebuild Jerusalem, which was in the province of Judea. And even from that time onward, even in the German language in World War II, they called them Judea, Jude, and put markers on them, try to exterminate them. That's the devil trying to get rid of God's people. But he couldn't do it because they got a promise. God got a promise that you can't destroy them. You can try to do all you can, but they're going to still rise to the top. And the reason why they go through all of that is because they wouldn't follow God's law. And when Jesus came, they wouldn't accept him. And still haven't accepted him. That's why they ain't going to never be victorious. But God would not allow them to be destroyed because he promised. But when the trumpet sound, they'll be on the way to the fire, just like other people who don't accept him. Questions, comments? If not, that is all for this evening, and we'll look forward to seeing some of y'all on Saturday in Greenville. But we realize that everybody is not going, so don't worry about it. Someone give us a closing word of prayer. Let us stand. Yes, Lord. Yeah, Lord. Amen. Thankful for a couple of new people who have joined us tonight. We're glad to have you. Hopeful that it will continue because